Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I hope that you're safe. I hope that you and your loved ones are safe in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. As I have mentioned earlier, so far, and I qualify that, so far, there have been very, very few infections in this part of the state of Oklahoma in which I live. About a week and a half ago, pardon me, they diagnosed one case. As you well know, this virus spreads like wildfire. I haven't heard an update to that number over the last few days. However, pardon me, given the track record of this virus, certainly the odds are that there are many more that are already infected. It's a dangerous disease. I was somewhat pleased yesterday as I listened to the president's press conference that he wasn't going to lift the sanctions that are in place, going to extend the social distancing, all of the recommendations that were in place until April the 1st. He just, based upon the medical authorities that he has assembled around him, and my goodness, what a cast of experts he has gathered, he just decided it would absolutely be the wisest course that we just not return to normal, even in those states, such as Oklahoma, in which there are very, very few cases. So please be safe, be cautious, be calm, be in prayer, okay? As I've mentioned to you, I produced a video series, audio series some years ago on the book of Philippians entitled, No Matter What Happens. Philippians 4 is in some way, Philippians, not just chapter 4, but the book of Philippians is in some ways a book of triumph. It is a book of triumph over trial. It is a book that says, as children of God, we may not have control over the external circumstances that confront us. Sometimes those things may even be unjust. They may seem cruel, such as Paul being in prison unjustly. And yet Paul could speak and say, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Now, was he pleased over the unjust circumstance? No. Was he saying that the unjust circumstances were actually, quote, good, unquote? Well, they led to the evangelism of some of the Praetorian Guard, which was remarkable. But no, Paul didn't say that everything that happens in this world is good. But he was convinced that because of our faith, that no matter what happens in this world, no matter what the external circumstances are, number one, they cannot separate us from the love of God. Romans 8:32 and following. What can separate us from the love of God? It's a rhetorical question. The answer is nothing. Just read the text. It's marvelous. And number two, no matter what happens in this world, even if it is very, very painful, it does not destroy our relationship with the Lord or our life with the Lord. After all, Jesus said, if a man believes on me and keeps my commandments, he will never die. So just keep that in mind in the midst of the fear, the paranoia that is gripping our world. Be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, and again, constant in prayer. Okay, well, we are looking at Matthew chapter 24, verse 32. A little bit of recapitulation. as they walked out of the temple, Jesus and his apostles, Jesus had just told them that the desolation of that temple, the destruction of that temple was coming. The disciples were obviously very saddened by that, because that temple, even as Roman Tacitus, or historian Tacitus tells us, people from all over the world traveled to see the Jerusalem temple. It was incredible. So the disciples were incredibly saddened. Now, they knew prophetically that it was coming. They just didn't know exactly when. They knew the Old Testament predicted the destruction of that temple. Jewish rabbis of their generation had predicted that it would be destroyed. Some had even predicted it would be in that generation. Rabbi Ben Zakkai as a good example. I may talk about that a little bit later, but the point of fact is, they immediately asked Jesus, when they began to show him the size and the beauty of the stones, he said, "Do you not see all of these things? The time is coming in which not one stone shall be left standing on top of another." And they responded to that by saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Now look, folks, they understood, okay? They understood. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and read the series of articles on there about which disciples were or are confused in Matthew 24 and verse 3. It was not Jesus' apostles that were confused or wrong to link the fall of Jerusalem with the end of the age and his coming. Well, they asked about the signs of his coming. Jesus gave signs: the preaching the gospel into all of the world, the abomination of desolation, the great tribulation. Those are the signs of the end. Matter of fact, he said, speaking of the great tribulation, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be dark and the moon shall not give its shall be turned to blood. The stars of heaven shall be shaken. Typical Hebraic hyperbolic language. And then in verse 32, Jesus says, "Learn the parable of the fig tree. When it sprouts its leaves and they turn green, then you know that summer is near. Likewise, when you see all of these things come to pass." What things? The signs they had asked about. "Then know that it," better translation of he, in other words, the coming of the Lord, "is nigh, even at the door." Now, historically, a great number of dispensationalists have said, okay, here we've got it. Because Israel is the fig tree, so Jesus was saying, when you see Israel restored, the coming of the Lord is near. Oh my goodness gracious, wait. Israel was restored in 1948. And thus, we were told over and over and over and over again. Hal Lindsey said, the restoration of Israel in 1948 is the fulfillment of Matthew chapter 24 and verse 32, because Israel is the fig tree. And when Jesus said, this generation shall by no means pass away until all of these things are fulfilled, Jesus was saying, when you see Israel restored, i.e. the fig tree's leaves turning green, then you know the coming of the Lord will happen within 40 years. Uh-oh. Hal Lindsey, the late great Planet Earth, Hal Lindsey, 1980s countdown to Armageddon. And look, one prophecy pundit after another appealed to Matthew chapter 24, 32, and 33, pointing right straight to 1948 as absolute proof positive that 1948 was the great sign that the coming of the Lord was to occur in 1988. Or Hal Lindsey, as the time drew near, Hal Lindsey began to hedge. He said it would, 1988 didn't happen, but it will most assuredly happen by the year 2000. But it didn't happen, did it? Do you know, I wrote an article some years ago, and I'm almost out of time here, but I wrote an article some years ago. It's on my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, entitled The Loss of Argumentation. The loss of argumentation. And I made the point that with the passing of time, many of what have been considered the key foundational arguments of dispensationalism have been proven wrong. I mean, after all, Y2K. There's 6 days of creation. Each day represents 1,000 years. The world has stood for almost 7 years. The millennium will begin on the 7th day. That's Y2K. That's the year 2000. You remember all the paranoia? You remember all the fear? I mean, every computer in the world is going to crash. The rapture is going to take place. The world is going to end. You know what? My computer didn't crash. Nothing eschatological happened. So they lost that argument, didn't they? Dispensationalists lost what had been up to that point one of their absolutely fundamental doctrines. Well, do you know what? They have now lost their fig tree argument. Once again, the argument is Israel is the fig tree. The fig tree budding is therefore Israel being restored. Israel was restored in 1948. The generation to see the fig tree budding, i.e. Israel restored, will see the coming of the Lord. A generation is 40 years. Therefore, 1988, they've lost that argument. So what did Hal Lindsey do? Well, he came back and he said, really, honestly, a generation can be as long as 70 years. Well, that didn't work, did it? So what did he do? He went back and he claimed, without any biblical support whatsoever, he claimed that a generation is 125 years. Well, that allows him to keep writing books, making more false predictions. And his followers have continued to buy his false teaching. Listen, folks. Matthew chapter 24, 32 and 33 has nothing to do with Israel being a fig tree. It has nothing whatsoever to do with 1948. And yet, even though Thomas Ice and Tim LaHaye rejected the fig tree illustration as pointing to the restoration of Israel in 1948, guess what they did? In their really popular book, Charting the End Times, they said 1948 was the most significant biblical prophecy of all time. Now again, they rejected the 40-year calculation. And so what did they do? They said, well, what Jesus meant when he said this generation will not pass away, what he really meant there, and remember, Ice and LaHaye, at least Ice, LaHaye actually believed in that Israel was the fig tree, but the editors didn't include his personal belief. But here's the point. They said what Jesus really meant was, well, the generation that will see the signs that I gave, Jesus said, that will be the generation of the end. Well, wait a minute. 1948 was supposedly the super sign of the end of the age. That should mean, therefore, that the generation that saw the restoration of Israel in 1948 should be the generation of the coming of the Lord. So Ice and LaHaye, even though they rejected the fig tree illustration and argument, they nonetheless made the argument that 1948 is the, quote, super sign of the end, and they have been proven wrong. And that's because the fig tree statement was simply an illustration that Jesus used to say, when you see the signs that I've spoken of, know that my coming is near. And yeah, we've got more on this. So I'll see you on the flip side.